Welcome to this Gradescope tutorial for TAs here at UVM. This is for specifically 31 and 32, where we use Gradescope as a way to allow us to grade on our own schedule, grade at our own time. We can grade, late at night, early in the morning, what have you, so we don't have to all get together at one specific time, which is a scheduling nightmare. So this tutorial is just to try to help you get used to Gradescope and how we utilize it in grading for 31 and 32. And I'm also going to follow this up with an assignment for these individual TAs so that they can, kind of practice, in an area that's not going to have any impact in terms of real grades, but kind of like a practice playing field. So when you log into Gradescope, I've already given you access to the 31-32 training, which we see here on the right. You eventually, probably later today or soon, if not already, you're gonna be added to the 32 or the 31 course, depending. I'm doing this in 2023 in the spring, as far as the video is concerned, but we should be able to utilize the video in subsequent semesters and years, since unless Gradescope changes. So what I would do first is we click in that box for the TA Chem training, and what we end up going to is a pane that really is called the dashboard. We see that off to the left, that we have our dashboard, and here is an actual active assignment, which is our training assignment. So we want to click that link, and that takes us to this idea of managing submissions. If we look to the left, we have a navigation pane to go between different things. The outline, the rubric, and managing the scans is something that technically usually the instructors put together. And then we really want to go to manage submissions, which is what we're at this particular point. Don't worry, we're also going to handle that as far as the instructors go. So what you want to do is, when you're given your assignment in terms of, okay, this is your question to grade for this particular exam, we can just go to grade submissions. So we go to grade submissions. Here we see all the questions that were actually on this particular exam, and they're all broken down in terms of the multiple parts that are there, as well as headings. So the blue is the links to grade the questions, and then the black is just kind of like a heading detail towards it. So we have two types of grading. One grading idea is a grouping and checking. The other grading option is calculation. So, and I will be specific, in terms of email assignments as to what you will be doing. So first, let's look at a grouping checking type question, and that really, it would be this first one, with the rate of oxygen in terms of general rates, question number 2, but 2.1. And I've already assigned what the question actually is, meaning it's a grouping type question. And so what the AI does is it actually does its best to group different answers. And so here we see we have our first group of negative 0.06. We have our second group, which really isn't that much difference, except we have that additional 0 at the end. Same thing with group 3, but now there's 2 zeros at the end. And then we start to find other answers that are actually provided. Some that are very similar, like our group 4 just has that extra 0, while group 5 doesn't have that extra 0, but they both have the negative sign out in front. And then group 6, which has no negative sign out in front. And then we have a blank group. It's a group that didn't answer the question. Sometimes the AI does really well at putting groups together, like this particular example. and sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes we actually have to make our groups as we go. But what we need to do, the first person, the checker, has to really go through these groups to make sure that they are correct, that they all are the same. And all we have to do is click within the box, and we're taken to all the answers, or all the students' answers that were thrown into this group. And if we look at all of these answers, these are all exactly the same. So we can basically confirm that group and then review the next group, or we could simply just go to the next group, or we could go all the way back and view groups, and that takes us back to that original pane. Or we can then again click on the next group and look at these answers and see that, oh, these all actually work as well. These are all the same. And then I can go back and go to then the next group. And these are all the same. So we find here that really all of these answers are technically the same. So what we can do, even though they're slightly different, they're all correct. So we can actually merge groups, where I'm going to merge this group with my other value that just has that extra 0, or my other value which has 2 extra zeros. And so I'm going to merge all of those groups now into one particular group. I then go down to the next piece, which is doing the same thing for these other groups that have been created by the program. That I can click, see that all those values are the same. I can go back, check the next group, see that all those values are the same as well. And now, realizing that really those are two of the same thing, I can merge those two groups together. And then lastly, we have the 0.024 group, and we also have then the blank group. So once those are all kind of organized by what I call the grouper, now they can go through and review that first group and make sure everything is okay. They can confirm that. You can do the second group and see that those are all the same and confirm that. Same with the third, and then same with the fourth. So once we've confirmed all the groups, right, realize that guess what? It didn't group all the values. There's some values that are really hard for the computer to deal with, and they don't really have a particular group to put them in automatically. So what we need to do now is take what's left over, what the computer couldn't organize, and we went through and organized it even better. And we see we have all of our groups over here to the right as far as what we've already generated. We can also create new groups too if we need to, and we might. So first off, I would say, okay, let's start with the negative 0.06. Let's see what other values we have out there. And so the first one there, that's not quite right because it doesn't have that negative sign out in front. That's one that's similar, even though there's no 0 in front. And all I need to do is click on that particular box and it selects it. Here we have -6 to the -2nd, so that actually is the same as our first box. So I'll click that as well. So now I've clicked 2 boxes. Notice both are highlighted subtly. And then I just kind of keep going. I keep walking through each one of these groups and see, like, that one looks good, that one looks good, that looks good, that looks good, and that's the values of 0.06 with that negative sign. And so now what I can do is just click the box that I want to put them in terms of putting them back, those ones that weren't organized, into a group that is organized. And immediately it shifts all those over into that group that we created, and then takes them out of our front pane, and now we have the rest to actually deal with. And so we can now start to go through those as well. So for instance, we go to the next group, which is group number 2. We have that negative 0.0024, and I see that written there. There's a little bit off a mistake. There's a little bit off with our power. That works. This next one works, right? These last couple worked. So those are then part of this group. And I just click in that box and it adds that to them. Now we have, the other groups. Do we see any that are positive 0.0024? I don't see that. And then I see blanks. I don't really see any blanks. Well, maybe that's 0. But here's where I would create now new groups. For instance, I go up, I click the plus sign, and now I can enter a name for a group, which let's just say is incorrect, for no rate given. And so that creates another group on my right side of the pane. And I did that because, well, 0 is not correct. It has to have a rate. So that answer doesn't really make sense. And then also this one, which is showing a rate expression, not actually a rate value. So I'm going to put those both in this incorrect no rate given box. And then we can go to some other ones, right? We, again, creating these groups, like first group, I would say is, incorrect. There's no negative sign. And that takes this particular value, the 0.06, as well as this other value, the 0.06, which are both positive values. And so I can throw them into that group. For the rest, I can get more specific, but all of these are really kind of incorrect. Either we have a really incorrect value, like we see with these, 2,4 values, and then we see very much incorrect 0.012 or 0.07. So I can just create a group that just is just simply labeled as incorrect, because there's not much going on there. Now, again, we can obviously go back and forth by selecting and deselecting. But another feature which is nice is that sometimes we might find it hard to read maybe a value. When I put my cursor on the box, notice that I can zoom in if I want to, but I can also zoom out and actually preview the entire picture, which is what we're seeing at the very bottom. That's this question number 2. So sometimes, the box is not filled in because maybe the student wrote it in some other area. We do try to direct the students by having a box, and that's where they should put the answer. But sometimes things can get funky. So So these all look incorrect to me, and so we're going to put them in that new incorrect. So right there is that question 2.1. Everything is grouped. It looks good to me as I've done it, but also realize that when we're in the real exam or real grading period, there's going to be, anywhere from 700 to 1200 questions that we have to go through. So obviously, we sometimes can make mistakes. So if you're assigned as a grouper, then this is where you would stop, that you've actually grouped all the answers into their appropriate groups that you think are right. And then what you should do is contact then what's known as the next TA, who is the checker. And so the checker would come back, and walk into the program just like we started, right? Hitting grade submissions, right? Notice that I've already grouped my values. That's why it has that ER there. And then the checker would go back in and then go through these groups and click the first group and just make sure that there wasn't a mistake, that all of these values are the same. And this could be a math value like we see here, but this is also could be a multiple choice value like A, B, C, or D, right, to make sure that those are all correct. And then we can go to the next group, and then again make sure that those are all the same. And so we need to go through all of them until we've, ascertained that, okay, everything looks good. And even with these blanks, what I would do is just zoom out to make sure that there is a blank. And like here we see there obviously is. Here we see there obviously is. So those values work. I say that for the blanks because maybe the answer was written a little bit askew, and not in the box. So that's why we should check that out. We can go to review ungrouped, which should already be done, which we did. That's what the grouper did. And now, as the checker, we can now say, hey, everything's done. We can go off to grading the actual answers. And so here's a really a pop-up of just, the answer that's there. But notice if we look at the top that we are grading by group. And this is that first group that had the negative 0.06. And this is actually something that was correct. Now, I apologize. Off to the right is the rubric. And for the most part, the rubric should already be developed for you. Here, we need to do a little bit more. So I'm going to add a rubric item, and I'm going to say -2, and then just say that's incorrect. So for this, since a lot of these grouping questions, checking questions, are ones that are either like really correct or they're not correct. And so this is what gets provided to the students once they look at their exams. So this group is correct. That is the actual value, and I'll assign that as 0. You will of course have the key so that you know what's correct and what's not correct. And like I said, for most cases, everything will be already done for you as far as developing the rubric. So I say that is the correct group. I then go to the next ungraded answer, and notice that takes me to a different group. This was this negative 0.024. That's incorrect. The next graded answer, again, this is that incorrect group, so that's incorrect. And then same with that last group, the blank. and then the last no rate given. So now if we look at the very top, it looks like we're pretty close. This actually allows us to know how we're going. We graded 51 already of the 53. And so here's the very last group, which is missing that sign. And so maybe if you're a TA that's a little bit generous, you could create a new rubric which just says, you know, correct answer, but wrong sign. And we'll assign that to that group. Now, if you're making new rubrics, what I would ask you to do is contact me to make sure that's okay, especially if you're new to using this program. If you're a TA that has experience with this program, well then, you know, we can talk about it quickly. I would still suggest that, but I definitely trust the ones that have more experience. So that's it. We changed that. So now I'll go to the next ungraded answer, and that pops us back to the original grade submissions piece to it. So that basically says that we're done with it. Notice that on the right side that it was grouped by a particular TA. Here are my initials, and then it was graded by a particular TA, again, of course, me. So that's the idea of the grouping TA versus then the checker and grading TA in terms of a question. So when we have grouping questions like this particular one, we expect that two TAs are going to work on it. The first TA is going to group the answers. Then that TA is going to contact their partner TA by email saying, okay, I'm done. You can now go in and check my work and then grade. And so that's how that process should actually go. The other type of question that we have is really more of a calculational style question. And so for that, for instance, Henry's Law at the top is a good example of a calculational type question. And again, when I make these assignments and give them to you over email, I will be very specific in saying that, oh, you're grouping this and checking that, or you're doing this type of calculational problem. When we look at calculational problems, we have to do them one by one. We can't do them, we cannot group them because of the fact that there has to be work shown to get to the answer. So for calculational ones, we have to go through each one individually. But this program is nice because it does help us to go from one exam to another without shuffling through pages. It really just takes us to that specific question again and again and again. So if we click on Henry's Law, since it's a calculational question, we're actually drawn to already that grading platform. So we're not even looking at grouping, we're already in the grading scenario. And we see that the rubric is already designed over here as far as, you know, some ideas that I think is going to be happening, meaning that we have an incorrect, you know, KH, we have, you know, an incorrect final pressure, or maybe there's just simply a miscalc, or maybe there's a sig fig issue that's going on. So here is the rubric that's already designed, and if we look at the pane, it's just giving us the box that it gives us the final answer. We need to kind of zoom out, and so I'm just clicking down to the right corner here, that zoom out button, and then if I put my cursor on the page and hold my left cursor button down, I can move the exam so I can see really the question that is the one that I have to do. Here, seeing number one. So now we see the entire bit of number one, and what we can do is save the view. So each time we go to a new exam, we have the actual same page in front of us. And so here we would have our key also with us. It looks like the student does this correctly, takes its atmospheres of 3.5, turns it into 2660, but that's actually problematic because KH is not in terms of millimeters of mercury. So this value is definitely going to be off. And even though they're doing it correctly by plugging in the solubility, plugging in the pressure, right, it's this pressure that is actually incorrect. They should have first used our atmospheres of 3.5, right, and then solve to get to the KH. So that means our KH here is actually incorrect. So that's why we come over to the rubric and click the -2. We then see that, okay, they go forward in the question doing it correctly, utilizing that constant, and then they solve for our pressure. Now, here we could also say that it's an incorrect final pressure because the answer is wrong. But we have to remember with calculational questions, we need to find where the error actually occurred. So we do not double dip. The error that the student made is right here at the very beginning with converting that to millimeters of mercury. The student should have kept it at 3.5 atmospheres. And that's the mistake that leads KH to be off, and then that's what then leads the pressure to be off as well. So we wouldn't click 2 and 3 and take 4 points off because, again, the honest mistake is just that first one. So I'll unclick that, give the student the 4 out of 6, and then I'm going to go to the NUX ungraded exam. And it's going to take me back to the exact same screen. And so now here we have a different exam, which is looking at our solubility. Looks like they do the first step correctly by getting the correct KH constant. They then plug that into the second equation where they're now trying to solve for that pressure. They get 93.6. And so they go forward to then give us our pressure in terms of the millimeters of mercury with the correct number of sig figs. So we would say that that is a correct value. And then we go to the next ungraded. And so we can see that is continuing as we go to the top, that we have this green bar that eventually will fill out. You know, as an example, this third one, notice that this equation, the pressure is equal to mole fraction times the total pressure, is completely incorrect. The second equation is not bad, but again, this answer would be in terms of atmospheres, not millimeters of mercury. So we could say that, oh, we have the incorrect equations, but what I would probably say is, you know, just be a little bit more lenient in terms of saying maybe -3, incorrect pressure equation. I click that one because it's a -3, but then I'd also look at the idea of maybe putting it as a miscalc in terms of this last equation. So what we have to realize is we need to be consistent. So as you're grading, you want to be consistent in your process, especially when we have these calculational features. If we ever need to go back, realize that we do have our 3 icons off to the left, which would be edit, create rubric, manage scans, manage submissions, right, which you don't need to worry about, but you can always go back to grade submissions, and then it takes you back to the original page. So again, here we have our grouping checking question. That's why we have 2 TA values there for what's grouped and what's checked and graded. And then if we have a calculational question like Henry's Law, we're just going to have a TA that's actually grading those individually, piece by piece by piece. And that's it. That's what you need to do. And then we should have grading done by the weekend after our exam. And then we'll go from there. I'll keep checking in on these things. So look to your assignment in terms of this tutorial. I'm giving everyone a question to practice with in terms of grouping and checking and grading. So please, over this weekend here, give it a shot. And then let me know if you are having issues. We can always then sit down and work together. But that is the 3132 Gradescope tutorial.